and I've experienced that I have to hit pause on the other one or I get this delay loop. There we go. Okay. I always say this, we're live. At least I think we're live. So, welcome to Cardboard in the Classroom. We're a podcast about using board games in the classroom to bridge a student's understanding and engagement with the purpose to enhance their learning experience. This episode brought to you by the great people at gamesurplus.com, where you can find the current hits, the classics, and the hard-to-find titles. Let Carmen and Elaine find your games and receive free shipping for all contiguous U.S. shipping orders over $120. Remember, gamesurplus.com. Great people, great selection, great prices. And in Canada, Amazing Stories in Saskatoon. If you're in the Saskatoon area, come by the store for Friday night board games, play and receive 20% off your purchase of any board games in the store. And these are the winners of the Joe Shuster Award for Best Comic Retailer in Canada and nominated in 2016 for the U.S. Eisner Spirit of Comics Retailer Award presented at Comic-Con. Hey there, this is episode 3 of Cardboard in the Classroom. I'm your host, Norm. And on today's episode, we're going to discuss board games in the library. And we have a special guest, so stay tuned. And then we'll do a little plug. And welcome back to Cardboard in the Classroom. I have a special guest in the guest chair, and I will let him present himself to you.
Hello, I'm Aaron. I'm from the Boards Alive podcast, and mostly a lot of stupid jokes from that show. So thanks for having me on. I'm excited to talk about libraries and my life therein.
This is one of my favorite things about having this hobby and the what we do in the classrooms and in the libraries with the students. It's basically we get to share our passion with the students. So I'm excited about that. Let's start off with the academic side. Like you said, working in the library. Let's give us a bigger picture on that. Where? I'm so envious of the location you live in right now.
Yes. So I work in a middle school. I'm the teacher librarian at a middle school. I've been working as a teacher librarian this is my 4th year in that position at Glen Rosa Middle School in West Kelowna, which is in British Columbia. So you've got the most beautiful province and we're probably one of the most beautiful cities in that province in Canada. So it's a pretty nice place to live, my friend.
And you have most of the retired Saskatchewan people.
Yeah, we get a lot of oldies that cross the Rockies, come in from Alberta and Saskatchewan, and they plant their roots here, and then we deal with their poor driving and slow retail purchasing in the superstores.
The opening up the change purse and looking for the exact change.
I used to.
Pennies. Who has pennies?
Well, we don't exactly. So when they try and pay with their pennies, and the cashier says, "I'm sorry, but that's not legal tender here in Canada," that's always entertaining.
Yeah. So it's what is it, like 1,000 pennies for American dime, something like
Pretty
that?
much at this point, yeah. Quentin, my co-host on Boards Alive, always calls it the Canadian peso because it's not a strong dollar comparatively.
Yeah. Or the CN.
Yes, exactly. So I work with we just added a grade this year, so we are now a 6 to 9 middle school.
Oh,
which has been an interesting experience. We are half of our school is brand new to our school this year, so it's been interesting because we've been able to change the culture a little bit and kind of push it to a super positive setting. I work in I would say a more challenging district or not district, challenging school and challenging neighborhood compared to some of the other areas in Kelowna. And so we face some tough negativity sometimes with our students. So it's been interesting to try and change that a bit this year. And so, that's kind of where I exist in the educational sphere.
Excellent. So now that we've established the context of that professional side, let's go to the context of the Geekapalooza side. Let's talk about board games from your most significant, earliest experience, and hit some milestones to get us to where you are today.
Okay, well, in my late teens, I played a little minis games. I played a little Warhammer, and we played Mordheim. So we played some of that great Games Workshop minis stuff, and we dabbled in Dungeons and Dragons. And then about just over 7 years ago, right around when my son was about to be born, we kind of got back into D&D for some reason. I don't really know why. I think partially it was because I knew that I would not be going out and hanging out with my friends as frequently as I used to be able to, because I was about to have a small child under my care. And so my friends were wonderful people and decided, well, if you can't come out, we're going to come to you. And one of the things that we were able to do was play D&D. And so that really got us back into it. And then in the process of that, we started listening or watching the PAX D&D show that they would do every year. And we saw this Will Wheaton fellow who I didn't know who he was because I'd never watched Star Trek. I know. Believe me, I hear of it. And so Quentin, my friend, had said, oh, well, he also has this show, Tabletop, and he's got these other games that they play. You know, I'd played Catan at that point, and I'd played Ticket to Ride, and I'd played Carcassonne, and they were all good and entertaining, but I hadn't like really dived down that hole yet. And so he was like, oh yeah, they have this game called Small World, and then I stumbled on the Watch It Played channel, and that just like in its early infancy, and I started watching those videos because we learned how to play Small World because of Rodney's videos, and I just fell headlong into this ridiculously amazing hobby at that point. So yeah, that's kind of, I don't have like a specific game other than Dungeons and Dragons that I would say really like pulled me in, other than all those games at the same time, all these cool opportunities of like trying these totally different games that were not what I had experienced in my previous time. Fantasy games or games that were like Risk, but not garbage like Risk.
Yeah.
Or, those kinds of things. So that's kind of where I came from. And then cool. About 4.5 years ago, I had this stupid idea to start a podcast with my friend. And so we took garbage microphones and sat them on a table, and we talked. And people were like, yeah, these guys are okay, I guess. And 4.5 years later, that's about how we're viewed in this hobby.
But I mean, you're doing it because it's intrinsic motivation. You do it because you want to do it. You do it because it's just like playing. Ryan and I were talking about doing this podcast and talking about it is scratching that same itch sometimes that when you're playing a game.
Oh yeah. If the reason we started doing a podcast is because we'll play a game and then we'll sit for 15 minutes or so afterwards and just talk about the experience. And so why wouldn't we just do that with a microphone in front of us? And so, yeah, it's just, it's really just doing what we've always been doing, but now for an audience. So I guess we throw in more like wiener jokes to make it palatable for people. That's pretty much how it goes.
Yeah. Up north, it's hot dogs. So
yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Pop, soda, hot dogs. So now we've got all that dialed in. Let's talk about what kind of made my attention go straight to you, following you on Twitter, and you were talking about all these really cool kind of resource-based learning approaches in the library that you were doing to enhance some of the students' understanding. And the first one that made me kind of pull in instantly was how you were using Power Grid. So, like, talk about, start off with using the board games in the libraries.
Sure. So the big thing for me is that I love board games, obviously, and who doesn't want to try and incorporate one of their hobbies into their regular job? And so I had, there's lots of ideas that you can have where you're like, oh, I wonder how I could use board games to help teach kids stuff. The problem is that it's really hard to do. Like, it's really hard to take a board game and make it work with, the content that you're trying to teach, or the, content sucks. Focusing on content sucks, but like the skills that you want to teach or whatever, and pulling in topics that work for the competencies. In British Columbia, we talk about the core competencies and the curricular competencies. These are the skills that our students are trying to develop. And what I get frustrated by and what I see sometimes is when teachers are just using games as a reward or as a time filler, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that drives me crazy, because I want to incorporate board games in the classroom in a meaningful way. And so I've been striving and super hard to incorporate games in a meaningful way, something that's actually going to help develop their skills. Now, like, you could talk about just using board games in general, because board games force people to think critically, to sometimes collaborate, to think creatively. Like, a lot of our main competencies that we're trying to get our students to learn. Yeah, I mean, you can cover a lot of that just by playing board games, but we also have content that we are, supposed to try and bring into to help create context for the learning.
Yeah.
And so that's a challenge, right? So one of the things that I was doing in preparing my mind on how to do this was I was reading books. And one book that I left it at work, and I've used it a bunch. And I was trying to, in preparation for coming on tonight, I was like, oh, I need to find the name of that book. What is the name of that book? And I can't find it. So I'm sorry to all those listeners, but there's a book that's about games in libraries, but it was games in like a school library setting, and how the teachers could use them in the classroom, how teacher librarians can help teachers use games in the classroom. And it's, at this point, it's almost a decade old. So some of the references and some of the games are a little older, but that was my jumping off point. And as I was reading through, Power Grid was one of the games that they mentioned. And I said, well, the big question that often when you want to use games in the classroom is, how are you going to do it? Are you going to buy multiple copies and go through that process, which can be very expensive? We just recorded the other night about how we talked about playing Cytosis, which is a cell biology game, and how would you incorporate that? It's probably not like a big group game where the whole class is playing one game, so you have to have multiple copies, and that's a little cost prohibitive. But I was thinking, Power Grid, I wonder if you could play that as a team game, because it's too challenging for just one group of kids. Like, it's a meaty game, and it's got lots of math in it. So it's pretty challenging to just expect like a group of 5 kids to be able to sit down and play it. So as the teacher, I ended up being almost like a games master of the game. I ran the game for them. But I thought, how about we add some role playing, some gamification a little bit to this game by having them pretend that they are a company. So, that's what you're doing in Power Grid. You're pretending to be a company. But what I did is I came up with an idea where each student would be a chairman of some sort on their company. So like, one person would be the CEO, and they would kind of be like the guiding leadership role, and some person would be the CFO, and they're handling all the money and making sure that they're budgeting their money right, because like that game is pretty tight on cash. You got to be really smart with your money. And one was let me bring it up. I think it was the CMO. Let me see. I've got all this stuff. Yeah, the CMO, the chief marketing officer. So they had to they could create commercials to get extra money for their company. So I broke the game. Like, we weren't truly playing Power Grid because I adapted the rules. I didn't I didn't make it so constricting. Like the board, when you play on the board, it's like, you know, you only play 5 regions if you're playing 5 players or whatever. And I said, no, forget that. The board is wide open. You can go anywhere. That made it a little easier for kids to get going and not fight with other companies, which is probably more fun when you're playing the regular game, but it's not as conducive to having them kind of like learn and build up their understanding, right?
Yeah, I was going to say that that allows them the opportunity to work that role-playing system that you created and to understand the synergy in between each individual role.
Exactly. So what we did is they would take, like, we still did the auction and we did it all, like I was trying to like rapid fire get, you know, like, oh, these guys are going 25. What are you doing,
Push up
Green?
the anxiety,
You know?
yeah.
Yeah. And boy, did I learn that kids are bad with money. So that was entertaining. And so we got to have conversations about like budgeting, right? Being smart with your money.
I love those teachable moments. Those are great.
Yeah. And they're minor moments, but like kids learn a bit, right? But I mean, I was doing this with grade 7 kids. They lack that frontal, you know, brain development to make some of those smart decisions, right? They're very impulsive. They don't understand risk super well. And so that was one of the things we were trying to get them to understand. And so we do that. And then after they bought their power plants, we said that, okay, well, you actually didn't buy a power plant. You bought the plans for this power plant. And now the government needs to approve you creating this power plant. And this is where we brought the research in. So what the kids would do is they would break into their group, they would be sitting with their group already, but now they would have to research a set of questions about the energy source that they just bought. So like we were playing the new fancy edition because it's got a bigger board and the resources are a little nicer and it's a little clearer. And so the resources in that, and they fit better with our province because instead of trash as one of the resources, it's hydroelectricity, which is a huge thing for BC. Like 90 something % of our energy is created by hydroelectric dams. And so they would do either that or oil or coal or uranium or green power. And so they would have to do the questions or answer the questions well enough that my team teacher, I was teaching with their science teacher, she would do all the marking because I'm not a science boy. I don't know. I learned some stuff. I learned that, like, you know, I mean, I guess I kind of knew that coal was really bad for the environment, but I learned why it was that it was releasing heavy metals into water and stuff like that. But like, but you know, she would kind of look at their
specialists take care of the specialist stuff.
Yeah, because that's not my jam, but they would be required to meet the government's expectations. The government, me and the teacher were considered the government. And so we could, if they did a really good job, we would give them extra money, right? We would say, oh, this is a government grant. You're showing that you really know your stuff. And so we would give them extra money or whatever. And so we just kind of played through the game and they had opportunities to research. And I always like to have a real world consequence or a real world, check-in in any projects that I run. And so what we actually did is we had the students about partway through, or no, I think at the start we let them know that they would be writing a letter to our local MLA, so a member of Legislative Assembly here in Canada. So that's the provincial government. So what they had to do is each student was going to be writing a letter to our member of the Legislative Assembly and recommending a resource type that our province should be focusing on. And so there was like a real world consequence at the end, and we made it cross curricular. So my friend Brendan, who's been on our podcast before, and I love working with him. He's like one of my best friends, and he's a humanities teacher. So what he did is he took the kids after we had done all this gameplay and he helped them research and write their letter. So any extra research that they had to do. And then he taught them like letter writing, professional letter writing, and how you speak to, you know, someone in authority and blah, blah, blah. And so we kind of grouped it into this big long-term thing that they went through with. And in the end, it was fine. Like I love talking about it, and I think that they learned stuff.
Well, I'm loving everything you're saying so far, just for the sheer like relevance of every activity that you've given them. There is a genuine, understandable purpose from their perspective.
Yeah, and so I think that they were forced to learn stuff and dive into a topic and make critical thinking choices. Like, that game is not easy, right?
No.
There's lots of math calculation, and I helped some of them through that. And I was like, okay, well, where's your best option? What are you going to do? Where are you going to spread out? Oh, well, are you going to have enough money to? Okay, so then they're thinking about budgeting, because this this science teacher also taught them math. And so it really became like this big all-encompassing project that took them, a good 2 months to do. Like, we played every other class. We were doing it. We were trying to do it so it wasn't every class, so that we didn't really like burn them out. So they would come down to the library for one class, and then the next class they had science, they would stay upstairs and do a different unit that they're working through or whatever.
Yeah.
Just to give them a break and not burn them out, but also keep it as like an interesting and oh, let's go down to the library learning commons and we're going to play this game and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that part worked. I would change some things. I would probably push them to do a little more in-depth research, maybe some more individualized research, because the big struggle anytime you have groups of like 4 kids trying to do any research is you still will have the 1 or the 2 kids that are not involved. Now, one of the jobs that we had was the chief information officer, and they were in charge of delegating the tasks for research. Right. So I was constantly like on those kids being like, well, what is Tim doing? Why? Like, you should be keeping him in line. Like, he is your employee right now.
Yeah.
So what is he doing? And trying to really bring some of that, like that role playing aspect into it a little more.
Human resources management.
That was actually my 5th role. So I had an emergency 5th role, who was the chief human resources officer in teams with 5, right? And so then they were in charge of making everyone in the company really do their assigned tasks, right? So they were like, and they also had to mediate, because you know what, these are grade 7 kids and they're wacky sometimes. And so there were times where groups were like, can we disband our company? Can we just not do this? Can we change who's in charge of our company? I was like, well, I mean, you're going to have to deal with that. Like, this is a real world situation.
Yep.
You can't just fire one of your fellow chief officers. So you have to work through that. Right. And some of those conversations came out, and there was one group that I had to disband, because not because of that. That was like a level of the teacher allowed them to pick their own groups. And this one group just was not being smart, was not making good choices, was not really taking it seriously. And so they ended up with an alternative project, which anytime you do something like this, I don't care if you think it's the coolest crap that you've ever done in your classroom, there is at least one kid that's going to be like, this is garbage. Like, literally the other day, Brendan did this game with his kids to finish up the last class on Thursday, which we didn't work yesterday. So it was like essentially their Friday last class. Yeah. And this one girl walks out, and on her way out, she turns to Brendan and says, well, that was the most boring class you've done all year. And he was like,
tip your waitress on the way out.
Wow. Thank you for that. Right. And because no matter what you try, when you try and do unique stuff, you're still teaching.
Well, the 10% rule, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You're still going to have kids that don't care but you're doing your best, right? And so in the end, I was happy with it. We ended up, some of those kids ended up coming to this like end of year thing where they had to present to our school trustees and other board members, the like head of our entire district, our superintendent, came up and talked to them, and then like was so excited because I guess he's a huge nerd, like huge board game nerd. And so
Yeah.
he came up and he's like, this is amazing. And I love what you're doing. And this is, board games are absolutely exactly what we want to see in our classroom, because yes, it hits all of our core competencies. They're making critical thinking. They're engaged.
Learning is what I love about it.
Absolutely. Right. And so he was really excited, and that really got my principal excited, because, when his boss is excited about what one of his teachers is doing, he looks good.
Let's get on board.
So I've been getting lots of really good support this year, and I would run this again with some tweaking, because like you and I were talking before we came on, it doesn't matter, right? Like, you can think it's great, but there's always something you can do to make it better.
And you have to think like that. You have to always wanting to be honing your craft.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's one of the ways that that was a long-winded description of one of the things that I did.
I was loving every second of it.
I do. I mean, there's other stuff that we do, and other stuff that I feel like has totally flopped for me. We've done some really cool stuff with our grade 9 social studies. Brendan and I have done using 1812, the War of 18 about the War of 1812, because that's one of the topics we cover in grade 9 socials. And so we used that in a more simplistic way, where they did a little learning about it before we played the game, and then we just did a simple comment question wonder, so that's like a worksheet that the kids would get, and as they played the game, they just needed to jot down a couple ideas, some comments about what they see happening in the game, some questions about things like, one of the rules in the game is that there are times where people will run away in the battles. And so, some of the questions that came out were like, well, why did they run away? Like, why didn't they stay and fight or whatever? And there was like, there's a card that's a turncoat card, where like some of the American soldiers can become Canadian because they're loyalists leaving America and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so those brought up some cool questions that they kind of like explored. And so some of the things that you can do can lead to inquiry based on just like exposing them to some more ideas and letting them, like you said, experiential learning, where there's playing with what's happening. And so some of those Academy games, the war, like the 1812, 1775, and then the French and Indian War, whatever one that one is, 1767, I think that one is. And so those are nice ones, because especially 1812, even though it's not as good of a game as the other two, like if you're just sitting down to game, it's a more simplistic rule set. And so the kids can pick up on it pretty easily. Plus, you can run it in teams pretty well, because it's naturally a two-sided game with multiple roles on each side. And so you can actually team them up, and people can be pretty involved in a meaningful way in that one.
Yeah, and I have that game, and it presents a relevant simulation as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so that one worked well, and I was happy with that. And I think what Brendan has done with that has been good.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, last year I also ran a socials unit where I collected a bunch of medieval era games, themed games. And then they did like a cycle of traveling around, and each day they would try a new game. Right. And so we used a variety of games. We used like Medieval Academy by Yellow, which I would never use again. It was very boring and didn't really do a whole lot. We used Century Spice Road, which is a tougher game for them to get, but also not super thematic, and yet it still worked pretty well. And I had a lot of kids that like, the funny thing about that game was kids really enjoyed it sometimes, and then would come back at lunch and play it because they had already learned it.
Yeah, I mean, that's great.
And we used Samurai. Samurai, I think, was the best one in all of those. And so it's about feudal Japan, where you're fighting over the three main, like, most important resources in that era of rice, religion, specifically Buddhism, and the samurai, the warriors, the knights. And so it taught the basics of like why there was potential for rebellion or like an overthrow of the main daimyo or the main emperor by other daimyos, as well as it was a simple enough game for them to understand. I really liked that one. And we used like some others. Dominion was one that we used, and that one worked okay. And so that unit I would totally change, because I was unhappy with, I didn't feel like the kids learned enough about their historical situation.
Okay.
And so it ended up being not as valuable as I thought. And I ended up changing that unit into a different style one where the students had to learn and teach a game. So it became actually like a more of a literacy understanding check. So we broke them into groups of 4, and each student in that group was given a game, and they were given the rule book for that game, and they had to read the rule book and then prepare themselves to teach that game to the other 3 people in their group. And then we did a 4-class rotation, right? So they would play all 4 of the games. And that was intriguing.
Well, this is preteen, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. So these are grade 8, so they're 12 and 13. And it really highlights the fact that instruction manuals are challenging, right? Like it's a different type of reading. And when students are used to, doing cursory readings of plot and kind of easily following a storyline or whatever, and not really parsing out rules, it's a real challenge. And so it was really interesting in teaching them like a variety of ways to troubleshoot that. Like, well, what could you do? How could you get over this? Oh, well, you could maybe go on YouTube, find a visual representation of the game and how the game runs so that you have support on when you want to teach it. Or, oh, what about Board Game Geek? This is an online resource that has tons of material. All the games I chose, I think the 4 games that I picked were King Domino, Forbidden Island, the Race to El Dorado, or whatever that Reiner Knizia deck builder. Yeah. And oh my goodness, what was the 4th one? Another game that was pretty easy to understand. I can't, in my mind, is
totally game, maybe.
Yeah, totally. Bios, Bios Genesis or whatever it is. But there's a 4th one in there that's escaping me right now. But they're all, like, to us, super easy, super simple games to understand. But to these kids, they were challenging, right? And they were really challenged to understand and learn how the game worked, how the game ran. And so it was a cool experience. It was it wasn't a socials thing, it was a literacy thing, right? Well, and so
I'm just thinking about their ability to, like, linguistically sequential thought, where sometimes they're so used to, because of the technology and because of the age, they're so used to scanning information that if you're reading a rule set, a comma is going to change the complete context of a rule that you're reading, or the interpretation of that rule.
Yes, absolutely, right? So it was a challenge for them. Ooh, the other game, I just looked it up on my computer, was Ink and Gold.
Oh, yeah.
So and partially one of the reasons we did this was leading into a board game design unit that these same grade 8 kids that earlier in the year had played a bunch of board games, the teacher that I'd worked with for that, she wanted to have them create their own board game as like a culminating activity of their grade 8 year. Kind of like we've covered all these topics, and there might have been topics that we missed that you would like in this like 1,000 year time span, because you're not going to cover them all.
Yeah.
And she said, pick a topic in this 1,000 years and build a game around it. And to lead up to that, they played all these games to kind of understand, of course, different mechanics and stuff like that. So that was kind of the basis for it. But it was a really interesting experience for them. And I would definitely recommend it. That's one I really like as a test of your reading skills and your understanding of, like you said, language and grammar, and how that impacts how you convey information. So it was really cool. So that's another thing that I've done. And actually, that went so well for that teacher that this year she and I are running a board game design class.
Oh, brilliant.
So all year long, her grade 8, this one class of grade 8s for her like design, it's an ADST thing, right? So like, you know, if it's like a STEM thing, if people listening don't necessarily know what that is, it's all about like technology and you know, design thinking and stuff like that.
Core aspects of education.
Yeah. So it's one of our exploratories now. So the like not core subjects actually. And so she's running that. We're using a lot of Kathleen Mercury's stuff for that.
I was just going to say, if you have not discovered that, that is a gold mine. She is brilliant in regards to what she's designed and have opened it up, open source.
Yeah, Kathleen is an amazing human. One of the best that I've never actually met in person. But she's we're using a lot of her stuff. We've built a lot of what we've been doing around how she structured things. So it's been amazing and it's been a cool start. And so we're getting into the point where they actually are going to be starting to design a mini game for themselves. And we actually are teaming up with Playtest Northwest down in the Northwest of the US, and using some of their forms for feedback, which is really cool, because that was one of our big weaknesses after we ran it last year, was that our students weren't really good at giving feedback, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of kids struggle with that. A lot of kids struggle with giving meaningful feedback. And so we're using their playtest form that they use with, you know, random schlubs in the coffee houses and conventions that do the playtesting for them. We're using their same form to use with our students to give feedback to the designers in the class. So we haven't tried it yet, but I'm really excited to have that support and resource to be able to kind of make what our students do better.
Yeah, and hopefully that'll separate the idea that it's not personal commentary, it's intellectual commentary.
Absolutely. Because one of the big things that we're kind of tackling right now in our school is this idea of the emotional connection to learning. Mm-hmm. And because we work with middle school kids who are emotionally just roller coasters, right? And so
I teach in high school, so I get the backside of those steep valleys and mountains.
Yeah, you're still seeing it. I know you're still dealing with it, but like, oh my goodness, just because like, especially since we're a grade 6 to 9 school, like we have kids that are literally half of me, like just tiny humans, and then we have bearded grade 9 students. You know, like it's such a weird breadth of students we deal with.
And you get them when they don't know how to deal with these emotions, where they're just. Everything's absolutely fresh and new to them, and yeah, by the time they're in high school, they know how to hide those angers and resentments.
Yes, and so getting personal feedback is really tough for them to handle sometimes, right? Yeah. And they very often take it personally, and so my plan is to really walk them through that and say, look, this is not an assessment of you. Yes, you put your heart in this, but this is an assessment of what you've built. And that's why I think Kathleen has them build a really short, basic game at the start, because it's not something they've heavily invested in. They can learn to take feedback well. And so that's what I really want. Like, the biggest challenge with board games in the classroom is the same challenge that you face anytime. You want it to be super successful and you want it to work, but there's always a glitch, and there's always something that you have to roll with, or you have to fix in the moment and support the kids that are like floundering or whatever. And so I'm really hoping that we can scaffold it in a way to really support the kids and get them bought in, right? The buy-in is so important.
Yeah. The one thing that I was wanting to kind of bring this all together with is at every stage and every idea that you're talking about, you without even me cueing it, you've talked about formative assessment, you've talked about doing surveys, you've talked about leading questions or the what next question. And I think what I've noticed with my use of cardboard in the classroom is that's the that's the legitimacy of making that bridging that understanding, because there's always going to be scrutiny from your colleagues who don't understand what it is you're trying to do. But if you show that in regards to your assessment and evaluation tools, that there is legitimacy in connecting these ideas and themes through the catalyst of this board game, that's to me, that's always the one thing I'm focused on is from a professional point of view, I need to have valuable assessment in order to give myself direction.
Absolutely. And I think I haven't mentioned it yet, but one of the key ideas in using board games or role playing games or whatever in the classroom is the opportunity for the student reflection.
Mhm.
So making sure that you set aside time that is meaningful for them to stop and think about what they did and why it's connected to their learning. Because if the bell rings, they're done, right?
Yeah.
Their mind is gone. And so if you time things up poorly or whatever, you need to fix that. And so it's really meaningful for them to stop and think about, well, what is it that I just did? And how does that change the way I see things? How does that make me think critically? Did I make the right choice here? How does this relate to the content that I'm covering? Whatever way you're trying to use the board game, reflection is so vital because it reinforces what you were trying to do. Because you need to help them make those connections,
As
right?
a high school teacher, I absolutely appreciate that point of view that you're working on, because at that preteen age, they need to establish some sort of routine or some sort of um, like you said, scaffolding. Priority this, then that, and I can't achieve the next level until I fully understand the concept of the level I'm working on. And there's so many times that um, when you skip those levels that you're talking about with the reflection and the introspection, it makes everything that you've done pointless.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so that would be my biggest stressor. Like if all of the other things that I've said have gone in your one ear and out the other for you because I'm just jibber jabbering about stuff that relates specifically to me, that's my biggest takeaway is make sure that if you're using it, like even I had teachers that wanted to do financial literacy in math last year. And so I worked hard to try and find games that would work with that. So I ended up there. They used Stockpile, and they used games like Acquire
I
and
love
for
that game.
for sale. I know you guys talk about for sale a lot on your show, and but then they were like, but also we would like Monopoly and we would like the Game of Life, and I almost threw up. And then and they said, oh, and Clue too. And I was like, wait, what? How is Clue about financial literacy? And they said, well, this was all the last 2 weeks before Christmas break, so really it was just an excuse for them to screw around, and that frustrated me.
That's not what we're trying to do.
No. And so, but I tried to instill, I said, look, you need to make your kids reflect. If they played this game, if they played Monopoly, because Monopoly, yes, you're dealing with
Yeah.
budgets and you have to make smart choices in the auction. I made them play by the right rules. They weren't putting extra money into the middle of the board and all that kind of stuff. But I said, look, if you want these kids to get something out of this, they need to reflect. They need to think,
Yeah.
well, how does this impact this financial literacy unit that we're doing? What did I have to do with my money? What were my plans along the way? And really, if you really want to do it well, they should be documenting and taking notes as they play to talk about what are my plans after turn 1? What are my plans after turn 2? What are my plans after turn 3? What am I going for? And that obviously is potentially stilting what the kids are doing as they play, but that potentially could be really meaningful in that they're really digging into the critical thinking side of things and making sure that they're really grasping the goal of that activity that you're trying to run. Because in the end, at the start of this talk, I said, we want to bring board games into our hobby or into our daily lives because we love board games. But if you're doing it just as that motivation, you're going to suck at it, because you really, in the end, it needs to be about learning. And so, like I did with Power Grid, you have to sometimes break rules or break the flow up or whatever you need to do to make sure that the students are understanding that that is still the key. Yes, we're playing a game. Yes, we're having fun, but we also are learning. This is also an experience where we're trying to gain knowledge from.
And that's the most difficult part, is trying to find that bridge where the purpose and the game kind of meet together.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, you know what? You've basically segued this right perfectly, coming right back to Power Grid, that I think let's transition into what's now becoming one of my favorite things about this when I have guests on, is the cardboard Pivo questionnaire.
All right.
Okay, so just for those who aren't as old as I am and remember lots of bad television, this one's based off of Inside the Actors Studio, and James Lipton borrowed this from Bernard Pivot, who was a host in France. So I basically manipulated the questions so it would match our fantastic hobby here. So you ready for them? 10
Absolutely.
questions.
Let's
All
do
right.
it.
So question number 1, what is your favorite game mechanism?
I think that my favorite game mechanism is dice worker placement.
Ooh. Okay.
I don't know why. I enjoy a lot of worker placement stuff. I don't know why dice specifically. I think it's the randomness that leads to tactical decisions in the moment and having to be reactionary.
What's your favorite game then of that?
I really like oh my goodness. I mean, Euphoria, but that's not really that dice worker replacement. I really like Alien Frontiers for that, with the dice worker placement, and Voyages of Marco Polo. I was on a rant today on Twitter about how Voyages of Marco Polo is fantastic, and Simone Luciani is probably like one of the most underrated Euro designers in board games right now.
I believe Ryan jumped on that thread as well.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
I appreciated his support.
All right, so on to number 2. What is your least favorite game mechanism?
Probably Take That. Yeah. I mean, roll and move is an easy one, but Take That.
That's low-hanging fruit, that one.
Yeah, exactly. I don't like when people can screw with my tasty engine. I mean, there are times where it's fine, but like in a lot of games, a lot of Euros, I'm like, well, you do your thing over there and I'll do my thing over here, and we'll just see who's better at it.
Yeah. Okay. Number 3. What engages you as a content creator?
The listeners make me want to be excited about what I do. Getting feedback from people, like those of you listening right now, you should be letting Norman, Ryan, and Tim know that you love this show, right? Like giving them feedback and letting them know that, like, that's what drives me, knowing that what I do, because content creation can be really weird in that you make it and you publish it on the internet and it's just out of your hands and it exists. And
it's unnerving
sometimes. Yeah, you haven't. I mean, is it like, yes, you can see numbers on like whatever podcast thing or YouTube or whatever, or your downloads and hits on your website, but the interaction is what really supports and reinforces what you do.
Well, and I think the interaction just through Twitter that I've experienced with this community is so supportive and uplifting. It's incredible. Let's move on. Number 4. Um, what turns you off about uh, the I was going to say content creation or the gaming hobby?
Uh, can I say douchebags?
You can. You can.
I would say
Give me
I
some
would.
context. I'm going
Yeah,
to
yeah.
say yes, I totally agree, but
Like haters, like people that want to watch the world burn and will just come at people for no reason or want to be counter just like want to counter an argument just to argue, right? Or the people that are just here to watch the world burn. I don't want you in my hobby. I want you to go do something else because I love how so often this hobby is accepting and supportive of everyone, no matter race, creed, gender, whatever. Like that's what I want to see. And I don't have any time for people who are targeting, who are going after people because they don't have the same worldview as them or whatever
Mhm.
bullcrap. Like no, forget that. You can go play a video game by yourself in your house because yeah, that I
Okay.
don't have time for that.
Okay. I I fully support that. Number 5. This is in the Pivo questionnaire. This is the question that says, "What is your favorite curse word?" But
I,
Yee-
I
I'll
would go with douchebag
Wait,
again as my answer.
what I've done though, I think it's a clever little twist, is what moment in playing board games or in board gaming has often made you drop the F bomb?
Oh, people getting in my way when I have a great idea or great plan. I was, I don't swear a lot. And at the table, I'm very calm. Like I talk a
But I
lot at
mean,
the
the
table.
swear could be in your head. It's just
Oh
that
yeah,
whole,
yeah.
"Oh."
I was playing Barrage, which is a brand new game on coming to Kickstarter soon from Cranio Creations, designed partially by Simone Luciani. And I was playing with Elisa from the company last night over Tabletopia, and just like 20 times over the course of that game, she would do the thing that I want to do right before it. And so it's like a worker placement game where the first spot is free. And if you want to also do that action later, like it costs $3 extra or more workers or whatever. And so there were just so many times where I was like, ah, oh, so close. So those are the kind of things, just like people throwing wrenches in my plans, really.
All right. All right. So number 6, what is your favorite sound or noise in board gaming?
Oh man, I don't know. You know what? No, that's not true. The box fart. You know when you push the box back in and the thing creates the box fart? That's got to be my favorite noise when it comes to gaming. That's what I'll go
Oh,
with. The
oh,
box
I was
fart.
trying to hide the adolescent part of my personality, but you said fart, so
Yeah.
I'm
Hey, you
done.
invited you've listened to my show
I,
before,
I
man.
I knew what I was in store for. I was kind of hoping for it too. So number 7, what is your least favorite sound or noise in board gaming?
Tearing, like ripping, like not. I'm fine with that with like Pandemic. I'm not one of those
Yeah.
people that's like, ooh, I can't. But like, the or no, maybe not that. Maybe it's the sound of a spilled beer on the table. That I think that's worse than ripping. Just like that, the the glug glug and oh no, that I think is my
That's
least
like the
favorite
slow
sound.
motion closing the car door, seeing your car keys in the car moment, kind of.
Hmm. Hmm.
All
Yeah.
right. Yeah, no, you made me cringe just when you said that. Number 8, what game would you like to play right now?
Oh man, you know what I've been jonesing to play again for some reason, and there's no way I would start it at 9 o'clock at night. But Twilight Imperium Fourth Edition, I was thinking about that
Oh.
today. That one I would totally play right now.
A little drool came out. I'm sorry. Number 9, what game would you be happy to never play again?
Oh, wow. Um, I mean, we're as reviewers, we get a lot of crappy games, but Oh man. I guess
Reflection.
like easy answer, like Munchkin. Because
Okay.
I mean, although I would play like a totally different, like random deck that I have never played before, because there's funny jokes in there. So that's probably not true. Like I don't like the game itself, but I could have a laugh with it.
A game that,
Okay.
like, if your
Oh
child came up to you
no,
and said, Go ahead."
I got it. Santa Maria. Santa Maria was a game that pissed me off so much because of how disrespectful it felt to the whole concept of colonization. And even though it was a really good game, it got like when we talked about it on the show, I got like
I heard that
physically
podcast.
physically angry. And so I'd be more than happy to never play that one again, or the new one from DLP coming out that's called Manitoba, that is just like a conglomeration of just racial insensitivity of, well, no, not racial insensitivity, but just like taking appropriation, cultural
Yeah.
appropriation, because they're doing it's all about, I forget which actual Aboriginal or Indigenous group it's about, but they actually are taking ideas from the Haida out on the West Coast with like totem poles and bringing it to Manitoba. And also
What?
Manitoba they have mountains, which I mean you would
What?
know. There are no mountains in Manitoba. It's
No,
flat.
we're on the prairies, man. You could see your dog run away for 5 days.
I know. So that game, I haven't even played it, but I refuse to ever play it just because of how just like culturally insensitive and just like culturally appropriative it is. So
Okay.
those are the
Okay.
kind of games that make me mad.
You got a big heart. I like that.
Thank. All right.
All right. Number 10. If money and resources were not a problem, what game would you like to design?
I've talked about designing a game that probably would never, like, no one would actually want to play, but that's a game of running your own board game store, your friendly local game store, where you have to manage your store floor so you can buy, like, it's kind of like if you ever played Brew Crafters, you can buy like upgrades to your brewery to make things more effective. So it'd be that a bit of that idea where you can add, like, gaming space to your game group, or sorry, your game store, or like extra shelves, or like a magic wall, or like those kinds of things. And then it's also like a time management game, because you're just you working at your store, because you're a startup friendly local game store, so you can't hire employees. So it's just like you, and maybe stealing some, like from Detective, where if you work overtime you get stressed out, so you'd get like stress tokens if you're working overtime to keep your store running. And so I think there would be some like cool ideas in that, but really it would just be like a boring Euro that people are like, yeah, but who really wants to run their own friendly local game store? So yeah, that I think that's one that I've thought about. Also, one that I came up with not long ago after listening to a podcast. I can't remember which podcast. They were talking about legacy games. Oh, it was on The Shuffle, which is
Okay.
one of my fellow Punchboard Media contributor, or like podcasts, and they talked about legacy games, and I thought of making a Harvest Moon style legacy farming game.
Oh,
So,
wow.
or like Harvest Moon slash Stardew Valley, where like you have your own farm, and every gameplay is 1 year, and you're playing multiple years over, like in this village where you're farming your land. But there's also legacy components where you interact with villagers, and you can fall in love with villagers and get married, or you could, like, help villagers build new stores in your town, or chase bad people off. Or if you're doing Stardew Valley style, there's like a Agricola, or not Agricola, but a Caverna, adventuring part where you go out into the
Yeah.
tunnels and do some adventure stuff. I don't know. I think that would be a super fun, like, campaign legacy style adventure that would have, a fun theme to it, and kind of like change the way you look at like a farming game.
And you know what? Being from the prairies, right away I was thinking we live that, and I still want to play it.
Yeah, exactly. But you wouldn't find all the great unique stories and characters that would be in that
Oh,
game.
you could have a on Main Street Coffee Row where all the retired farmers would sit and talk about the weather.
Yeah, and they would, and you maybe by doing that you get advice and you level up one of your skills.
Ooh, like
So
talking
now
to the masters, the wise Yodas.
exactly. And then there's probably like a talking bear that you find in the forest or something. I don't know.
Don't
Like,
start forest fires.
exactly.
Okay, I think we're starting to get a little silly now. I'm going to take that as a cue that we should wrap things up. So I'm going to just give us one last closing moment for you to tell us how and where we can find you.
Okay, so Twitter is the best for interacting with us, as you already mentioned. We are at Boards Alive, and I'm on there a lot, and I love interacting with folks there. If you want to listen to our podcast, it is much less insightful and much more of the tail end of this, the stupid jokes that I'm trying to make. That's most of what our show is. And so you can find us wherever you find podcasts. You can find Boards Alive. And we've got like a main flagship show where we talk about games and review games and discuss stuff. And then my wife has a show called It's Date Night.
Yeah.
A podcast that she and I do that's all about the games that we play together on date night, and also the Ask Date Night version of that show where we give advice on how to be good humans, and I guess like board game related stuff with that too.
Don't play Take That games. That's the first step.
Hey, you know what? Sometimes you got to get that like that nice back and forth, that like, oh, what did you do? Yeah, it sparks the fire every once in a while, right? And so that one, and then we do Boards Alive plays where we do some live, or I guess just not live action role playing. It's not that, but it's like actual play podcasts where we play D&D, or we've played other things like Star Trek Adventures, or someday we'll finally finish our Kids on Bikes series. And even my son, who is 7, has started doing mini 10-minute-ish shows with me called Boards a Little, which is the little version of Boards Alive. So we do almost weekly content at this point. And so if you just have nothing going on in your life and you need to listen to a lot of podcasts, we can provide a lot of content for you.
I do have to say I'm hugely entertained by your latest your top, what is it, your 40
top
to
50?
31?
Oh,
but,
yeah.
But the trash list.
Yeah, my wife is
I'm loving that.
Just a very unique. I felt like the first 2 episodes we've done of that have been really highlighted by the fact that Lindsay has just trashed some games because
not just trashed, it's like hanging on by the hair and taking a knee right to the forehead.
Oh, yeah, she is a lovely blunt woman sometimes. And so those are really good because like really we're doing a top 50, and the 50 to 30 zone is not nearly as entertaining. Like those are games that we love, but they're not those top ones. And so to have Lindsay kind of like evening us out with just some very sick burns on some games, it makes it a really entertaining listen. So thank you. I appreciate that.
For part of me, as I'm listening to it, is I'm smiling all the time while I'm driving, going, she's saying the things that everybody else is thinking.
Yeah, it's like Jerry Seinfeld comedy level of board game podcasting.
Have you ever noticed? Yeah. Well, that being said, thank you so much for sitting in the chair and providing some content for Cardboard in the Classroom, and for everything you're doing for your students. I just can't I can't help but keep promoting this idea through the educational system. And so yes, thank you from us to you.
No problem. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for doing this. This is a really meaningful thing to have in our hobby, to, because there's a lot of teachers that are board game fans, and I'm sure there's lots of people out there that want to know how they can do that. We did a panel at Shucks last year on this very topic, and we had a great turnout. We had lots of great feedback, and people want to know, like, how do I do this? And it needs to be done well. It needs to be done meaningfully. And so I really appreciate that you guys are working hard to try and support people in making their content for their classrooms meaningful and engaging for their students. So great job.
Well, thank you. Being an instructional designer, I just wanted to create a venue for like people like yourself who had fantastic ideas for the classroom and no opportunity to share those, because I mean, as educators, we're always head down into what we're doing and rarely have a time to, take a breath and have a look at what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. Teaching can be pretty insular. So that's what part of my job is as a teacher librarian, is to go door to door and say, hey, what are you doing? How can I help you? How can I break you out of your multi-year funk of teaching by yourself, potentially, right? So
fantastic. Well, thank you to, as we always like to joke around, thank you to that one person who's listening to the podcast and making us have purpose. So thank you for listening to Cardboard in the Classroom. I'm your host, Norm, and our guest tonight was Aaron, and we'll catch you later. Take care.